Good morning, everyone. We are in Maseches Meiser Sheni, Parak Aleph, Chapter 1, and we are on Mishna Hay. Yeah, Mishna Hay. We're actually going to do Mishna Hay and Vav today because they're very closely related. Now, the Torah tells us that when you have redeemed your Meiser Sheni produce onto money and you spend the money in Yerushalayim, you're supposed to spend it on, the Torah mentions cattle, flocks of sheep or goats, wine, and old wine. The Torah mentioning these examples of what to buy is actually meant to give us, or to actually is created a common denominator from them. And it's based on that common denominator that they have that actually tells us what we can buy with the Meiser Sheni money, what we can't. Meaning the Torah's examples are not specific to say it's only these things. It's more than these things. But it has to be something that fits into certain categories that these examples represent. And therefore the Mishnah says, Halakeach mayim umelach, if you buy water, salt, uperes mechabarim lekarka, or produce that's still connected to the ground, a peiros she'eni yochel lagil Yerushalayim, a produce that wouldn't be able to reach Yerushalayim by the time it spoils, loy kana meiser, the meiser will not work for that. Okay. Now, the explanation, this is the following. Sorry for the noise in the background. That when the Torah mentions the examples that we just read, it means to tell us that there are 4 characteristics that are necessary for what you can purchase the Meiser Sheni money with. Number 1, they have to be edible. Number 2, they are nourished from the ground. Wine is made from grapes that grow in the ground, and animals are nourished by eating plants. So that's the second characteristic. 3, they're not attached to the ground, as none of those examples are. And 4, they can easily reach Yerushalayim without spoiling. Only items that share all these characteristics may be bought with Meiser Sheni money. Therefore, water and salt are not nourished from the ground. Attached produce and food that will spoil for reaching Yerushalayim don't possess the last 2 qualities that we mentioned. And therefore, the Mishnah says that all these things are excluded. So, lo kana Meiser means the Meiser money does not. So, if you take the Meiser money and you buy any of these things, it's not going to work. You can't use Meiser Sheni money for these things, and therefore, the whole purchase doesn't work. That means the money will stay the same. It'll still say sanctified, and won't be transferred out to the objects, and the objects will become yours. Now the Mishnah continues. Okay. Now, the food that you buy, Meiser Sheni money is supposed to be bought with food. It's supposed to buy food in Yerushalayim. But you just realize is very interesting that one of the characteristics is that it has to be fruit that could have made it to Yerushalayim. Even though you're not buying it outside of Yerushalayim, you're not supposed to be buying it outside of Yerushalayim. It seems to be one of the characteristics it says one of the characteristics are that what you're buying with the Meiser Sheni money has to be something that could have made it to Yerushalayim. It's got to be, unless it means a case where you did it outside of Yerushalayim, which we will talk about. But I didn't see anybody bring that up, that we're talking about, you have this characteristic about something needs to be able to reach Yerushalayim, but it can't be bought outside of Yerushalayim. So I'm not sure how those 2 things work together. I just realized this problem. I'm not really sure. But it could be, as we're going to see, that there are cases that if you did the wrong thing and bought something out of Yerushalayim, it would work. So it could be that's this example of things that can only make Yerushalayim are actually talking about a case where you did what you weren't supposed to do, but it still works, and it won't work if it's on something that couldn't make Yerushalayim but small beforehand. Now, Halakeach peiros, one who buys fruits with Meiser Sheni money. Now, the case here is that it's outside of Yerushalayim, it's Meiser Sheni money, and you're using it out to Yerushalayim to buy Paris. So let's remember, it started off as produce of Meiser Sheni that was separated. The sanctity of that fruit was transferred onto money, and now you're using that money to buy Paris, to buy produce. So the Mishnah says, Shegeg, if you did it unintentionally, means you didn't know, you didn't realize the money you're using was Meiser Sheni money when you bought these fruits. And then you realize afterwards that it was. The money returns to its original place. That means the seller of the fruits will give you back your money. You'll give back his fruits. It'll be as if nothing happened. Because this is an example of what's called a mekach tois, a mistaken purchase. We can assume that if you would have known that this money was Meiser Sheni money, you would never have used it to buy this produce. Why? Because it doesn't really make sense that you would want to. Originally it was produce. You transferred it onto money, which is done to make it easier to bring to Yerushalayim, and now you bought produce again. If you would have, the only reason you did that was because you didn't realize this money was Meiser Sheni money. If you would have realized, you never would have done it. So now after it was done unintentionally, that's called mekach tois. That's called a mistaken purchase, and it doesn't work. So everything just goes back to its original place and status. The money remains sanctified. The produce doesn't become sanctified. You give back your money, give back the produce. So that's if you did it unintentionally. But Mazid, if you did it intentionally, you knew it's Meiser Sheni money, and you anyway spent it outside of Yerushalayim, which is something you're not supposed to do, but you did it anyway. So the Mishnah is about to tell us it works. Nonetheless, it works. Yalu v'yachlu b'makom. So now that produce that you bought, you bring it up and eat it in its place. That's what you do, because it has the same. Because once you purchased it with this money and you knew it was Meiser Sheni money, so you know what you're doing. There's no mistake involved. Therefore, at the end of the day, it works. If it works, that means that the sanctity from the fruit has Meiser Sheni sanctity. What do you got to do with it? You got to take it to Yerushalayim and eat it. The main mikdash, and if there is no Beis HaMikdash, so what do you do with this fruit? You're covered. You let it rot. What this really means is that without a Beis HaMikdash, you still have to separate Meiser Sheni from your produce, but you're not allowed to eat it, even in Yerushalayim. So what do you do with it? You have to let it rot. And that would be true. That would hold true, whether even in a case where, let's say you separate it, there's no Beis HaMikdash, you separate the Meiser Sheni produce. Okay, you separate the Meiser Sheni produce. Theoretically, it would seem that in that situation also, just let it rot. But here's a very interesting halacha that we have to bear in mind, and that is the following. And that is that actually ordinary Meiser Sheni money. So in this case in Mishnah, let's backtrack for a second. In this Mishnah, we said you went ahead and you took Meiser Sheni money, you bought produce. If there's no Beis HaMikdash, you let it rot. Okay, that is our case is where again there was Meiser Sheni produce. You transfer the sanctity onto the money, and now use the money to buy produce again. So the Mishnah says that you have to take those fruits have to be left to rot. Could you actually now take that money, take that produce, and transfer the sanctity from that produce onto money? Again, it starts with separating Meiser Sheni produce. You transfer the money onto the money, you transfer the sanctity onto money. You now transfer the sanctity of the money onto the fruit. Could I now again transfer the sanctity from the fruit onto the money? Yes, you can't do that anymore. At this point, you can't transfer it anymore. And therefore, the Mishnah says you let the produce rot. In circumstances where, again, there's no Beis HaMikdash nowadays, and you have to separate Meiser Sheni. You have to do that, or else it's tevel. You can't eat the produce. But now, after you separate it, and there's no Beis HaMikdash, where the halacha is, even in Yerushalayim, you can't eat it, it would seem you have to let it rot. The answer is, actually, you don't. If you're starting up your original produce of Meiser Sheni, you can transfer it onto money, the sanctity onto money, and then destroy the money. Throw it into the ocean. That's a lot easier than letting the produce rot. Because You don't have to have, if the produce is worth $10, you don't need $10 to redeem it onto. You can redeem it onto any coin. And then you just get rid of the coin. That only works if you're dealing with the original produce of Meiser Sheni. Our Mishna is not dealing with the original produce. Our Mishna is dealing with produce that got that acquired the sanctity of Meiser Sheni because you used Meiser Sheni money to buy it. Then already you can't, and therefore you got to let it rot. Okay, that's the end of Mishnah Hay. Mishnah Vav continues in a very similar way. Havakeach behema. Again, it's Meiser Sheni money. You're using it to buy an animal outside of Yerushalayim. You're not supposed to do that. But this is what you did. If you're buying the animal with Meiser Sheni money, right, the possibilities of what you could be doing here is buying a domestic animal for a sacrifice, which you can buy animals outside of Yerushalayim as a sacrifice to take Yerushalayim. That in itself is not an issue. The issue is because it's Meiser Sheni money. But if you're talking about buying an animal, you can buy the animal, a domestic animal, animal that's domestic for a carbon, for a sacrifice. Because we learned yesterday, such animals you may not and cannot buy, not for a carbon. And if we're talking about chaya meat, a non-domestic animal like a deer, there you're buying that meat for eating purposes, and that's fine. So our Mishnah, the case is, l'keach behema, you bought an animal with Meiser Sheni money. Shegeg, it was unintentional. You did not realize that this money was Meiser Sheni money. Yachsu demela mekayma. The money goes back. It's a mekach tois. It's a mistake. You're not going to go ahead and transfer sanctity from produce onto money to then buy an animal and schlep an animal. You're not going to do that. And therefore, it's a mistake. If you would have realized that this is Meiser Sheni money and I would have used it for this. So the whole purchase is a mistake. Nothing happens. The money goes back to the owner, no sanctity. The money comes back to you, but it's Meiser Sheni sanctity. Mazid, but if let's say you did it intentionally, it was Meiser Sheni money, and you used it, which you were not allowed to do, but you did it. So now again, take this animal, bring it up to Yerushalayim and eat it. If it's meant to be a carbon, bring it as a carbon. If it's not to be a carbon because it's deer meat, then you eat it. It's got to eat Yerushalayim, and that's what you do with it. And that's the sanctity of these things have the sanctity of Meiser Sheni. You can't transfer it back onto money. And you got to take these things up to Yerushalayim and eat them. The main mikdash. Now, if there's no mikdash, what do you do then? You can't eat. Without a base hamikdash, you can't eat the Meiser Sheni. It's something that doesn't have something that has Meiser Sheni sanctity. You cannot eat it, even in Yerushalayim, if there's no base hamikdash. That's the halacha. That's the law. So now that you use this money to buy the animal, and because it's a good purchase, the sanctity is transferred onto it. What are you going to do with it? The answer is to cover day oira. You let it die, and then bury it with its skin. The entire animal has the sanctity of Meiser Sheni money. You can't use it for anything. So in the previous Mishnah, fruits you let them rot. The animal here, you let it die. Eventually it dies, and when it dies, you bury it because you can't have any benefit from it. Now here, there's something very interesting that the Mishnah says, and that is, the Mishnah says, bury it with its skin. That means the skin, the hide of the animal, also became sanctified with Meiser Sheni money. Now we had before that if you buy an animal with Meiser Sheni money under regular circumstances, like with the Beis Hamikdash, and you're going to, you buy an animal with Meiser Sheni money. The Mishnah said before that under simple circumstances where you're buying this animal to eat it in Yerushalayim, then the skin, the hide, doesn't become sanctified with the Meiser Sheni money, because when you're primarily buying the meat, so the purchase is the meat and the skin just comes along, and therefore only the meat becomes sanctified and not the hide. We did mention if the person buying it, right? If the person who is buying this animal also is a tanner, which means that the hides mean something to him, that means the purchase did include not just the meat, but primarily also the skin, then the skin had the sanctity. But that distinction isn't made here. Here this Mishnah says you bought the animal and the hide is sanctified also. You can't keep the hide for yourself. That means it also attained the sanctity. Why is that? And the answer is because in the previous Mishnah, where you're going to be eating it, Again, the purchase is primarily the meat, and the hide just comes along. In this case, though, there's no Beis Hamikdash. So you knew you're not going to be able to eat it. Why you bought it? I don't know, but you did. But there's no Beis Hamikdash. Everybody knows you can't eat it then. And therefore, you can't make this distinction between the meat and the hide. Because there's nothing more special about the meat than the hide. I can't use any none of them are going to be able to be used. So therefore, now when I did purchase it, the purchase includes both. Because there's no reason to distinguish and say the meat is the primary part and the hide just goes along. There's no reason for that. I can't eat the meat anyway. I can't eat the meat. I can't use the hides. So they're both the same. So when I made this purchase for whatever reason that I did, there's no distinction between the meat and the hide. It's just the animal. It's the whole animal. And therefore the hides also get the sanctity of the Ma'aser Sheni money, because at the end of the day it works. And when you have to let it die and then not benefit neither from the flesh nor from the hide, which means you got to bury both. Okay. Now for Lashon Harah from the Chavetz Chaim. Okay, so we're continuing with this discussion about the law that if a person speaks Lashon Harah in front of 3 people, one of those 3 people would be able to, according to some opinions, be permitted to repeat it to others. Because since there were 3 people who heard it, it's going to get out, it's going to become public knowledge, is not included in the prohibition of Lashon Harah. Okay? Now, now let's say the person who spoke in front of 3 people says, don't say this over. Could have been a lot of people he said it in front of, but he told them, do not repeat this. Then anybody, including the original listeners, may not now repeat what was said. It will be considered Lashon Harah. Even if, again, you're not trying to spread it, even if you just happen to be saying it over, you can't. Once a person tells you may not say it over, you can't. Under all circumstances. Even if, let's say, you see that people aren't listening to his warning, they're not paying attention to what they're not heeding what he said. Nonetheless, doesn't allow the other person now to go ahead and to reveal it. The point being that even though, so to speak, we have the Ape Plus here, we have the 3 people here, we have the components to say, well, it's going to get out, so it's not Lashon Harah, it doesn't help you when the original speaker told you, do not repeat this. That hinders the ability to use that permission. And even if the other people aren't listening, which means that, again, what would be happening normally in front of 3 is going to be happening anyway. It's going to get out. It's going to get around. Nonetheless, you cannot go ahead and say it because the person who originally said it told everyone not to repeat it. That alone doesn't allow you to repeat it. And then the next halacha, there's no difference in what manner the original person warned the people not to repeat it. Whether he said, don't talk about this, don't let this be known. You cannot go ahead and now reveal this derogatory statement originally made of this person, even to someone, to a third party, to a different person, and certainly to the person it was said about. If you now tell it to someone else, at the end of the day, you repeat it to someone, it's going to get around, it's going to be back to the original person. And this person warned, do not say anything here. Now, okay, so then on the bottom, the Chavetz Chaim adds the following little footnote. Now, so the case that the Chavetz Chaim spoke about was where he told these people, do not repeat this, which means to anyone. But let's say the original warning not to repeat was not, don't repeat this at all, but is, don't tell this to so-and-so. Meaning this Reuben was speaking about Shimon, and Reuben tells the listeners, do not repeat this to Shimon. Okay? Efshar, possible, meaning this is a question in the Chafetz Chaim's mind, but it's possible to say, the mutar legalis b'mikra la'acher, then you would be able to tell someone else, again, following the regular rules of Lashon Hara said in front of three, which is not to spread it, but just to repeat it. Although normally the prohibition of Lashon Hara is even if the person who told you doesn't warn you not to repeat it, that's where he didn't say it in front of three. But in our situation where we are talking about that it was said in front of three, if the original warning doesn't include others, so at the end of the day, if it's something that's going to get around, right? The people who are listening are going to spread it. He never told them, don't say it. He just said, don't tell it to so-and-so. But he never warned the other people not to say it. So the other people will spread it. It's going to become well-known. There's no prohibition of Lashon Hara, again, according to these opinions, if the intention is not to spread it. Meaning, when the Chafetz Chaim says that if the original person telling the Lashon Hara warned people, don't say it over. Okay, that's when he said, don't say it over. He told no one to say it over. So no one's allowed to say it over, no matter what, even if other people aren't listening to the warning. But if all he said was, don't tell, Reuven says Lashon Hara about Shimon, and he says, don't tell Shimon, then all he said was, don't tell Shimon. He didn't tell other people they can't say. So he didn't say you can't tell it to other people. So if so, it comes out that now you have a regular case of apiklasa, saying Lashon in front of three people. The other two people are going to spread it. It's going to become well known. You can say it as long as you're not trying to spread it. And no one warned you not to tell it to other people. The warning originally was only about the person being spoken about. Okay, but to everybody else, there's no warning. So I can say it then because the Lashon Hara was said in front of three. Again, he says perhaps that could be argued. Then the Chafetz Chaim concludes with something that, again, that from the way I understand it, has nothing to do with the warning situation case. Another thing he says that this is elementary. The case has to be where one person being Lashon Hara in front of three. Lafuki to exclude Mishnayim Sibra Shnayim, two said in front of two. Then this whole permission doesn't apply. This permission is only if the permission is of this speaking Lashon Hara, what would be Lashon Hara, but now it's permissible, is only when it was said in front of three people. The fact that it was, let's say, originally said by two, which is the equivalent of witnesses, in front of other two, which it would be the equivalent of witnesses, it doesn't help you. The listeners to be able to say that now it's going to spread enough so that one of the original listeners can say, well, I know that it's going to get that it's something that well known, and therefore Lashon Hara doesn't apply. It only works when the one person who wants to use that permission has the other two people that are spreading it. They're anyway going to spread it. They're going to spread it. But if you only have one other person who's going to spread it, it doesn't work. Have a wonderful day.